Hello, and welcome to A Gap in Justice, your podcast for anything crime-related. Today, I am here with my wonderful sister, Lindsay. How you doing today, Lindsay?
Good. How are you?
I'm alright. I'm absolutely tired. It was my birthday this weekend, well, on Thursday, and I went kind of hard, so...
Yes,
I'm
I know you did.
Yeah, I'm still a little out of it, but I'm excited to do
He
this. So
rescheduled on us, and so here we are on Labor Day working.
yeah, we have to. So I have to do this
So
by.
he has to pay me double time.
So today we're talking about what is his name?
Joseph Oberhansley.
Joseph Oberhansley. This is probably going to be the first and last time you hear me say that because I will not remember that. I will go by Joe from now on.
I don't know if he goes by Joe, but we're going to refer to him as Joseph from now on because,
Okay.
yeah, he has a ridiculously long last name.
Cool. So I heard a little bit about this story from you. Not too much, but it sounds a little bit intense. So this might be a bit of an intense episode. So I'm excited to get into this with you.
Yeah, a little bit of a disclaimer. It's definitely going to be some fairly morbid things we're going to be talking about. This case has been in the media a little bit. I mean, it's about 5 years old. It's recently came back into the limelight due to some issues, but I think that this is a really great story for us to talk about. Just, honing in on us and why we do this and our gap in justice. This episode is really going to talk about like the criminal justice and mental health, which I think is a cool thing to really look at because, how do you protect people who have mental health issues or not protect them? And to what extent are they protected under, being incompetent and things like that. So, yeah, I think that this is a good story. It kept popping up when I was trying to look at stuff for last week. It kept coming up. So I'm like, I feel like it's almost telling me we have to do this story just because it is coming up. I also think though too, I keep trying to do episodes that we could potentially do like a bunch of mini episodes in the future because this case is actually, he's not even tried yet. So
Yeah,
they've
so it's
literally,
still open. Okay.
well, they've literally been trying to try him for 5 years and it's, his mental competency is in question quite a bit. So that's been delaying the trial process for years.
I think this is one of the most trying topics when it comes to the criminal justice system for me, is because I'm a very big advocate on mental health,
Me too.
but there is so much you can fake with mental health, and people try to do that as, it's
Sure.
a get out of jail free card sort of, where
Sure.
they claim it and some people have to act like they have mental health, but then you don't know. A psychologist is going to know everything about someone's mental health within a little bit of time, so it's pretty crazy.
Yeah, so so this case goes back to 2014. He's been in custody since, so it's not like, they've waited to charge him or things like that. We'll talk a little bit about the story in a little bit, like the backstory of how he's there. But yeah, so since 2014, they've had issues with him. 3 psychologists have found that he's not competent to stand trial. So last year, about 2 years ago, they found that he was not competent at that time to stand trial.
Okay.
But he's been in an Indiana State psychiatric facility, and last fall they deemed him now competent for trial. So actually about 2 weeks ago is when his trial started. The judge has since declared a mistrial. So I think this is another reason I wanted to talk about this case too, just sticking with the topic and what we like to do. They've already deemed this a mistrial. So, and we're going to talk about why they deemed it a mistrial because I think that's the part of the story that really bothers me as to why they deemed this a mistrial.
Okay. I'm interested in hearing about it.
Yeah, so the victim in this case is Tammy Jo Blanton. She was 46.
We'll get you a visual.
Yep, so she was 46 at the time of her death. Joseph was 33 at the time of the murder. So yeah, like I said, we're going back about 5 years. So there's Tammy Jo. Basically, the state of Indiana is trying to say that Joseph stalked her, raped her, killed her, and then ate parts of her body.
Like I said, this story is going to be a little intense. That's the one thing that Lindsay told me, and Being from Wisconsin and having one of the most notable cannibals of all time, it's a bit scary. So keep going, Linz.
Yeah, it's. I have to kind of realize, like, given my background and what I've done for a living and just the type of stuff that I listen to, like, that's not always normal for people.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not shocked by stuff. I am just very go with the flow. But yeah, I mean, this guy is considered to be like the cannibal killer. So if you Google his name, there will be something with cannibalism that comes with that. So, I mean, obviously, I think this is why his mental health comes into play. And actually his defense attorneys talk to about, like, okay, technically his defense attorneys cannot talk about his, like, mental competency. They can't in the trial. But they kind of will sneak in things that make you... I mean, his defense attorneys also think that he is not mentally stable. So, okay. I mean, when you think of cannibalism, I'm sure people think like, well, something has to be wrong with you. Right?
Yeah. I mean, for sure. Yeah.
You're eating a person. Like what? Yeah. So, like I said, since 2017, there's been issues. It's been delaying the trial process. He was not able to be found competent. He now is. I've seen a few videos of him recently because August 22nd, actually, is when they declared the mistrial. So last month, not even a month ago. I mean, we're talking just a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And you can watch videos of him outside the courtroom, and he doesn't seem stable, And so if they're saying he's stable now, could you imagine
how he was before?
Yeah,
exactly. Yep. I totally gotcha.
Okay, so Tammy and Joseph were dating for a few months, and they also lived together for a few months. So, I mean, this is a very short-term relationship. They broke up, and she changed the locks. So, she was telling coworkers, like, I'm done with him. I don't want to be with him anymore. But she was also making comments about she just doesn't want to live in fear anymore, and she's going to refuse to stay at friends' places. So I think that this guy's got a little bit of a reckless history. I think there was probably some domestic violence going on, or maybe some threats of domestic violence that made her a little bit fearful of him. I think definitely obviously warranted once you kind of hear a little bit about the story. So, Jeremy Mull is the prosecutor for this. And so in the recent trial, he was talking about how, when you slaughter livestock, they get treated better than the way she was treated. So it was a very grisly scene. So,
okay.
Apparently, like, in her final moments, she, like, locked herself in a bathroom. He ended up, like, kicking the door in. And then, ultimately, like, when the police interrogated him, he said something like, truth be told, she really wasn't all that scared. Like, she knew I was going to kill her, but, she wasn't scared in her final moments. So, there's something, I mean, even kind of looking at him, like, you can tell there's something a little bit interesting about him.
It's a dark thing to say, that she wasn't scared, like, right away. Like, that's intense.
Like, and he said too, like, he knew. I mean, he went in there with the intention. I mean, the prosecution is saying he went in there with the intention to kill her. So, she intentionally changed her lock. She broke up. He went in there, and ultimately killed her. So, let me see. My stuff's kind of all over the place, but I want to see how I want to present it. I know that in this case they said that the death penalty is off the table as long as the defense doesn't use an insanity plea. So, I've heard this both ways. So I've heard that Joseph wants to just be executed. And I've also heard that he does not want to be executed. So I think he's very confused with this process.
Yeah.
So I wonder, like, is this even a gap in justice? Because he's saying one thing and then doing another. He's tried to fire his attorneys numerous times throughout the years. And so it's Judge Carmichael is the judge, and she keeps telling him, like, you have to work with your attorneys. You need to do what you can. You need to try to continue this process.
Yeah.
You know, recently, last month when they were doing the court hearing, the prosecutor's up there, like, presenting his opening statements, and Joseph is, like, cutting in and talking over him and getting upset. And, you know, so, I mean, I really think that his mental, you know, capacity is really just going to continue to be questioned throughout this process because, you know, I mean, when you're a defendant, your job is to sit there, you know, and to listen to the trial. And
Yeah,
if you go on
exactly.
the stand, then you can talk. But I think the probability of them putting him on the stand is 0%. So
Yeah.
that would not be a good idea at all. But I think he's definitely not very happy about his attorneys. And the attorneys also have talked about he's pretty difficult to work with. So his own attorneys have actually said he is suspicious. He's paranoid. He is uncommunicative. I can't say that word. Uncommunicative. Right?
Uncommunicative, yes.
Whatever.
It's okay.
And agitated. So, you know, I mean, he's presenting. I feel like even that is presenting with some mental health as well. I mean, you know, so
Yeah, so he's a
these are supposed
sketchy
to be
individual,
people that
right?
are trying to help you. Yes. Recently, too, at his recent trial, before it was declared a mistrial, he actually like hand wrote the judge a note and then he handed it to the judge. Well, the judge is obligated to read it out loud. So she read it out loud and it said that he's tired of being in a cage and he just wants to be executed. But he's also the one too saying like he doesn't want the insanity plea. So I don't know. I mean, it's a little bit confusing. So, all right. September 11th, 2014 is when this murder was committed. So basically what happened is they broke up. She wasn't answering. He came to the home. He kicked in the door. She ran to the bathroom. He kicked in that door. And ultimately he ended up killing her. So she was found in a bathtub with 25 stab wounds. And she had blunt force trauma to her head. There are a lot of defensive wounds on her as well. A few days later, it was, work reported that she didn't show up to work. So some of her coworkers actually did a welfare check on her. Like I mentioned earlier, too, obviously her coworkers knew about him and, knew about their relationship and the ups and downs and things like that.
Yeah.
So the police went over there to do a welfare check, and Joseph answered the door. Why?
Yeah, why is he answering the door? That's crazy. Okay.
Yeah, so he answers the door, and he said she's not there. He doesn't know where she is, but he's acting very suspicious. He was being very evasive about her whereabouts. Like, he doesn't own the home with her. It's technically her home. So the police end up coming back the next day and forcing their way inside. And when they enter the home, they just find this grisly scene. So, I mean, that could honestly almost speak to his mental health as well. He's answering the door for the police and still staying there after... he stayed there and they came back the next day and found her. So, that could probably speak to some stuff as well. When they came in, they found a plate with, like, skull and blood on it. And they also found, like, a skillet and tongs. And so this is how they know, like, he had actually, like, cooked some of her. He had actually ate, like, some of her brains. And then, like, cooked her heart and lungs.
Oh, so he picked, like, specific parts of her to... Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, this is where, like, the cannibalism stuff comes in, because when he was interrogated, he very much was, like, talking about all this stuff, and, talking about, like, different things, and obviously they found this evidence that showed, like, her chest was cut open and her heart was removed, so, I couldn't even imagine, like, being the police who had to go there. Like,
yeah, that's an intense scene to walk upon. Like,
yeah, they even talk about, like, cop suicide rates are high because of things like this. Because, I could only imagine, like, this is a human being, this is a person, and I can only imagine, like, walking in and seeing that. So he initially denied doing an interview, and then he basically just was, like, going on and on and on. The police interviewers were saying stuff like he appeared to be talking to himself when nobody was in the room. He refers to himself as Zeus. He also referred to himself as Zeus in like the courtroom recently also. He continues to maintain his innocence, and he says that he continues to tell, like, he told the police that day, and then remember we were just looking at that video earlier that talked about how he continues to say that 2 armed black men did this.
Yes.
So you can actually hear him, like if you guys Google him or things like that, you'll find that he'll continue to say that 2 armed black guys did this, and that he had to chase them off. Why he's still in the home or why he didn't call 911 or things like that, I don't know.
I'm going to change up the slides for you guys, too.
Yeah, I mean, we have a bunch of slides with, like, him going to court. Obviously, this has been a very long process. He's been moved from jail to the mental state institute to... And then once they found him competent, he was then transferred over to prison. Yeah, so he's been in handcuffs quite a bit. He's been back to court quite a bit. So at one point he said that 2 armed black men did it. At another point in the interview, he said that he could hear Tammy's thoughts, and she was going to cut off his head. So ultimately that's why he had to kill her. So, I mean, I definitely think that, I mean, there's no question that there's some issues going on with him. So the judge declared a mistrial last month, and this is why the judge declared a mistrial. So one of the witnesses was friends with Tammy, and Tammy was saying that, or not Tammy, sorry, her friend Victoria was one of the witnesses. So Victoria was on the stand, and she was talking about how Joseph and Tammy were having a lot of issues, and there was like domestic violence stuff going on, and Tammy did not want to call the police on him because she did not want to see him go back to prison, and that she was thinking that his behavior was as a result of his drug use. So, you know, his past criminal record was not allowed to be in the trial, and his past drug record was not allowed to be in the trial. This is, I guess, I have a real big problem for that. I have a problem with that.
Yeah, I mean, I would too.
And the reason I have a problem... So basically this trial was considered a mistrial because she disclosed his past criminal record. So now the jury knows that he has a past criminal record. The reason I have a problem with that is because just take a guess what his previous crime was.
I don't know. Murder?
Yes. Murder of a previous spouse. So, I don't know. I mean, don't you think that that's relevant for the jury to know?
I mean, if a spouse is getting murdered and his previous crime is a spouse getting murdered, I feel like 2 and 2 kind of go together. Yeah. I mean, if you're not going to talk about drug use, I mean, I don't find that correlated at all. Like, why can't you talk about, oh, he has drug use? I mean, that's not going to make you, I mean, murder someone. People do drugs all the time, and they don't kill people and eat them. So
true. I mean, the previous crime, he was also, so he claims that he was high for both crimes. I mean, you know, depending on the day he says he did it, depending on the day he says he didn't do it, but allegedly he was high for both crimes. So, I mean, I think that speaks for both, you know.
Is that supposed to make it better, though? like that, in my head, like, people will say, like, oh.
Some people can people try to justify their behavior. Like, well, that was okay that I did that because I was high. You know, I mean, obviously. So, I mean, part of my background, too, is I used to do substance abuse counseling. And, you know, when I worked at the women's prison, a lot of the women did fail to take responsibility for their behavior because they're like, well, I was high when I did it. And I think it just helped them to feel better. Like, they didn't have to feel guilty about what they did. Yeah. You know? But no, I think that, I think some people do that. You know, they'll say, like, well, I was high when I did that. Like, ultimately, you're responsible for your behaviors, but, you know, okay. But so, I mean, prior to having a trial, obviously, the defense and or the prosecution can say what they want to admit. You know, the defense obviously wanted to admit his past criminal history it ended up being omitted for whatever reason. This witness gets on the stand and then talks about it, so obviously that results in a mistrial. But
Yeah.
I mean, how can the witness not talk about that? Like, she specifically said the victim did not call the police on him because she did not want him to go back to prison because he was out on parole for killing his previous girlfriend. How can you not talk about that? How is that not relevant to the case?
I mean, I would say that's the most relevant piece of information that anyone probably got the entire case. So
Putting aside his mental health, let's say he doesn't have mental health issues. Let's say he did it and he said he did it. Why wouldn't you say that he has his prior crime? And I think they're saying like he's going to be judged based on his prior crime, but early behavior is indicative of current behavior. So I'm confused. All right. So December 9th, 1998, when he was living in Utah, he killed his girlfriend and he shot his mother, and he tried to kill himself. So we're going back to 1998. So he shot and killed, actually it's the mother of his child. He tried to shoot his mother, who actually ended up living, and she's now forgiven him years later. And then he also tried to kill himself. So obviously he's still here. Part of what I had looked at on this was what happened when he tried to kill himself. Like, what happened as a result of that.
yeah.
So he's claiming he was high on meth when he killed his 17-year-old girlfriend. The bullet from that time remains lodged in his frontal lobe. So the problem is the frontal lobe does a lot of stuff, okay? So, I mean, rather than the defense trying to omit his criminal history, they should probably try to say that he did this behavior based on his injury, The frontal lobe is responsible for your motor function. It's responsible for solving problems, memory, language, judgment, impulse control. I mean, so I think there's a lot of other things that really should be looked at based on this trial. And, are his attorneys doing enough to, if he has to spend the rest of his, it appears as though he needs to spend his life in a psychiatric ward, I don't think that's what he wants, but ultimately I think that, in order to keep the public safe, which is part of the responsibility of the criminal justice system.
Correct.
I think that that's ultimately what needs to happen. He's reckless. I think it sounds like he was reckless prior to this injury, and this injury could potentially make him more reckless. So, all right. 1998, kills his girlfriend, tries to kill himself. 2000, he pleads guilty to manslaughter. I don't know how. Manslaughter? Why is this not first-degree intentional homicide?
So what's the difference between them?
So, first-degree intentional homicide is intent. You intended to do it. You did it. You followed through. You had a plan. You did it.
Oh, so manslaughter is like an accident or something?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so he killed his girlfriend, shot his mom, tried to kill himself, and he got manslaughter for it?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay.
He was sentenced to no more than 15 years. He ended up doing 12 years. So he did 12 years in a Utah prison. I think when you look at the criminal justice system and you look at like victims and their families want justice, and I think the biggest problem of all is that people say, this guy did 12 years for a life. Is that enough? And most people would say, no.
Absolutely not. No.
This person is gone forever, and they got 12 years of their life taken when this other person got their entire life taken. He killed his 17-year-old girlfriend. 17. So,
Do you know how old he was at the time?
Well, so 1998, was that 20...
It's 21 years ago.
21 years ago, 33 at the crime. When did this crime happen? Yeah, you know I'm like really bad at math. 2014. So he was also 17.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm doing calculator math on my phone
It's
right
okay.
now.
It's okay.
Yeah, so he was also 17. So, yeah, I mean, so I guess the whole thing that bothers me is like they're upset about and declared this mistrial because his criminal background's out there and now it's tainted. What do you mean it's tainted? He killed somebody and then he killed somebody again.
I think that's clearly relevant to the case. It doesn't, in my brain, it doesn't comprehend that someone could be like, okay, we're on a murder trial and he previously murdered someone. Why is that not released to the people that are seeing if that's insane to me.
But it goes so much deeper.
Yeah.
He murdered a spouse. He's on trial for murdering a spouse when he previously murdered a spouse. You know? Yeah. So...
Like, they line up perfectly.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to switch up slides for you guys, too. This is him in 1998, right? Yeah.
So this is actually his... this is him going back. I mean, he looks 17 when you think about it.
He does. He looks very young, yeah.
Yeah, he looks very young in this picture. I feel like he's aged a lot. We'll show some other slides down the road, but yeah, he's definitely aged, I think, throughout this process. We're going back, obviously, but, this is his first crime. July 2012, he's actually released from the Utah prison, and his parole is transferred to Indiana. So at that time, he moves to Indiana. Mm-hmm. About 9 months later, he is arrested for allegedly choking a man. So he's chokes this guy, gets caught. I mean, he's not a sneaky criminal. Like some people are sneaky and some people get caught right away. And he's the type that gets caught right away.
Yeah.
So he was released on $1,000 bond, which is interesting because, I mean, like in the state of Wisconsin, if you're, we have a very small percentage of people on parole, but a majority of people are on probation. But if you're on probation, you do a new crime, you're going back to prison. There's no, Yeah,
there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You're literally going back.
Yeah, so. I mean, he wasn't, he was actually still on bond for this crime when he murdered Tammy. So he didn't have his trial yet for this allegedly choking this guy. But yeah, I mean, so Indiana is definitely very different than Wisconsin, because in Wisconsin, if you're charged with a new crime, you're going back to prison. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. So that was in March of 2013. July of that year, he's then charged with strangulation and resisting law enforcement in that March incident. So a few months later, he was then charged. The end of July, the Indiana parole officer alerted the Utah authorities about the strangulation arrest. So what tends to happen is if your charge is from a different state, you're still technically, like, I hate to say property, but you're the property of that other state.
Yeah.
So even though he came to Indiana, he's still technically Utah's problem.
Okay.
Like, he's out on loan. And so if he's having issues in Indiana, essentially Indiana could say, no, go back to Utah.
Yeah, they'll send it back. Okay.
Yeah, or Utah could say, no, you have to come back. So that's why they're saying, like, they alerted the Utah authorities. This happened in March, and they're alerting him in July, which I think is another gap in justice. Because, I mean, this guy then goes and kills somebody. So, I mean, you have to start to look at where's some of the responsibility potentially for Indiana police as well as Utah police.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think this is where families get upset, because you start to think about, are authorities essentially responsible for this, or could this have been maybe possibly prevented?
Yeah, because it was a few months before anything else was happening, so he could have been locked up at that time. So totally understand.
Or he could have been back in Utah. I mean, he could have obviously terrorized somebody there, but okay, so about 9 months after that is when he then ultimately starts dating Tammy Jo. So obviously he's not in jail, he's not in prison, he's just charged with this, he hasn't actually gone to trial, things like that. July 21st. So she was killed in September. So we're in 2014. So we're looking at July. So July 21st, he leads police on a slow speed pursuit through 2 states.
Wow.
I love how they say a slow speed. Because he does. I mean, he's going slow. But so it's a 2-state pursuit, which is funny because, I mean, obviously he's going slow, but, if you, okay, obviously we're closest to Illinois, so if I'm a Wisconsin cop, I can't chase him into Illinois. I'd have to actually call Illinois police who could then chase him, but I mean, he's going slow, so they could have, radioed ahead. Hey, he's coming your way. We're pretty close to the Illinois border, too. I mean, I actually work very close to the Illinois border, 5 minutes away.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah, you'd have to actually call in Illinois police, but I find it a little bit humorous because I'm like, this is like OJ stuff,
Yeah,
where OJ did his slow,
Yeah, they're just on a relaxing cruise, you know what I mean? Just take
whatever.
it in the sights,
2 days later, the Indiana authorities alert Utah again about this, this slow speed pursuit. They obviously arrested him eventually from this, this speed chase that happened. So Indiana again alerted Utah about this arrest. But his Utah parole expired that same day.
Oh.
So nothing happened.
Wow.
Back when they told... So, if we're looking at the two things, so it was about a year in between. So, he got released from a Utah prison in July. About a year later is when he was charged with the strangulation. About a year after that is when he did the slow speed pursuit. So, it appeared as though he was had a 2-year, parole.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, again, you're in prison for 12 years for killing somebody and then you're just out for 2 years. I think that's pretty
lenient,
short.
To say the least, yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, and again, not that the Wisconsin criminal justice system is wonderful, but you're doing half of your prison sentence on probation. So if you get a 12-year prison sentence in Wisconsin, you're doing probation. 6 years. Okay. So I think that's, I don't know, 6 years feels like a really long time. However, 2 years I think is short.
Yeah, I mean that's obviously the problem. It's depending on the crime and everything. That's the biggest flaw with our justice system, I guess, or not our justice system in general. Just, I mean, we don't know how long someone needs to be watched, I guess, until something like this happens, right?
I mean, I don't know. The sad thing is, and I don't know a whole lot about Utah prison system or Utah reform, but, I mean, is that a state that wants to do reform? Is that a state that does, courses and classes and tries to set up people for success when they get out? I don't know. Yeah. So I think that really does make a difference, obviously. Do they try to say they set up people for reform and they don't? Because that's what Wisconsin does. So, yeah. I mean,
switch up slides for you guys.
Yeah, so this is a picture of him and Tammy Jo. I mean, he looks happy.
Yeah,
he also looks like a normal guy.
Yeah, this has been the most normal picture for you guys who don't watch on YouTube, but you can check out our YouTube if you want to see some visuals. He looks, and this is just a normal picture I would see on Facebook that I would like because they look so happy. They look like they're having a good time. So
yeah, I've learned recently that, we don't know what goes on in people's homes and that, just because something's presented on the outside doesn't mean that that's really what's going on.
Oh, for sure, yeah.
I think this is a great indicator of that. Because
I think people hide things well, for sure.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, so, we're looking at 2014 July. Utah parole expired that day, so obviously Utah's not doing anything about it, which... Thanks, Utah. Good job.
Yeah. Right.
A few days after that, the prosecutor agrees to lower his bond from $25,000 to $5,000. He ends up getting out on $500 bail. So Tammy Jo actually paid his $500. So they started dating for just a few months. He went on this slow speed pursuit a few months later. He was in jail for a little bit. She ends up paying his bail. early September, so we're looking like September 1st, September 2nd, Tammy ends up ending their relationship. Okay. So if we're thinking about it, I mean, they're together from like March until September. Very short period.
Okay, so just a quick like 6 months, okay.
Yep. And then not even 2 weeks later, that's when he's accused of breaking into her home and then ultimately killing her. So, you know, I mean, I think she obviously knew about him having a criminal record. He had issues while they were together. She obviously paid his bail, things like that.
Yeah.
She tried breaking it off, and then yes, ultimately he then broke into her house and killed her. He also, it looks like he was pending, remember that he strangled that guy, so he was pending that case.
Yeah.
He was also charged with criminal recklessness with a dangerous weapon and resisting arrest. So that's that slow speed pursuit. So he had those 2 pending charges prior to this. So again, I mean, you know, you have to really kind of look at like, should he have even been out? Should he have been in jail? Should Utah have done something different? Should Indiana have pushed it more? I mean, you know, like, it's a lot of questionable stuff.
Oh, for sure.
It's like, a lot of, like, I feel like things could have been done more, and they're not.
Okay, so in the case of him murdering Tammy, they can't bring up any criminal things. So they can't bring up him strangling someone, saying he's violent.
Nope.
That's what it doesn't make sense to me. Because that would clearly show something violent within him. Or him going on a slow speed chase. That's like you said, the frontal lobe is injured. That is judgment. Correct?
Yes.
Like he's literally, what are you running? You're slow speed. You're not going to get away. That doesn't make sense. It literally doesn't make sense. You're not
going to get away.
You're clearly not going to get away. If you're going 25 on the highway, people are like,
I mean, where they kind of, you know, I don't know. I feel like sometimes people mess with people. Like, maybe he's trying to mess with people. You know, actually, part of what he told the parole board is that the bullet that was lodged in his brain from 1998 actually helped to calm his rage. And that's part of why they let him out.
Oh.
Yeah. I mean, obviously not. But, yeah. So, you know, it's... I know I say frustrated every time, and I hate to say that again.
She's just a frustrated person.
Yeah, and don't ask my boss. She'll probably say the same thing. No, but yeah, like, I think that from the prosecutor's standpoint, they don't need the criminal background because the cops found him in the house. And they found the evidence, and clearly his fingerprints and DNA is everywhere. And he admitted to doing it. I mean, yeah, he's taken it back since, but he's also admitted to doing it as well.
I mean, he answered the door for the wellness check.
Hi, guys.
Like, hey, like clearly there's something.
She's not here, but then they're like, the police were like, he's like looking around, and I mean, I guess part of the reason they came back too is because his like knuckles were bloody. And, I mean, it was pretty clear, like, something was wrong and he was involved.
This is just clearly an intense thing, man. We'll give you a visual of, I mean, here he is. He looks a bit out of it in this picture.
Yeah, I tried to find some pictures that kind of represented, I think, what he's going through right now. And, you know, I mean... This has been a 5-year ordeal just trying to get him to court. And, you know, he's definitely, I think, struggling with stuff going on. Like I said, he gave that recent note to the judge basically saying, here, I wrote down his quote. I'm tired of being in a cage. I just want to be executed. So, you know, he also was trying to fire his attorneys. And because he said that they're trying to control his mind and his thoughts. So... He's been deemed competent. They are actually starting a new trial tomorrow. So I thought this was interesting to talk about too. So, I mean, they're moving this along. They just declared a mistrial about 2-3 weeks ago, and they are moving it on to, you know, they're trying to get this done.
Yeah, so they're not dragging it along. That's at least a positive note where hopefully someone could get some closure when it comes to Tammy's family, or, I mean, it's an intense thing when...
The prosecutor is really tired of just this being delayed,
Yeah.
and I think it is in everybody's best interest, including Joseph, to just get this moving and
over
going.
with, yeah.
Ultimately, though, I think the big part that we have to really look at, though, now is if clearly he has some mental health going on. Yes, he's been deemed competent to stand trial. However, if he is found guilty, he's going to go to prison versus going to the psychiatric ward. And is that an appropriate place for him?
Probably not.
No, it's not.
I mean, he thinks that, like, I go back to even his excuses, like, of how he thought he could hear Tammy say he was going to cut off his head.
Yeah, she was going to cut off his head.
Like, that's I've read things since we've started this podcast, I've gotten a lot more into it, and I go to my sister for all her knowledge to see, like, what do you think about this? Yeah. And I remember reading something about a lot of the times when people murder someone, they either, like, hear voices, or if it's, like, a mental health thing, they hear voices, or they see something, and they're like, oh, this person's gonna kill me, I have to kill them before they kill me.
Yeah.
So it feels like this is one of those things where he's telling himself that this is true.
I think the scary thing about this whole thing, too, is, like, so it's documented that he's a drug user. I think he's been an ongoing drug user, and, if you have mental health and you then mix that with drugs, that makes stuff even more scary, because you could potentially be worsening it, And so if he's hearing voices, he might almost use drugs to alleviate the voices when essentially it could be making it worse. So, yeah, I mean, I can't say I feel bad for the guy, because obviously he killed somebody, but I think that we have to really kind of look at, are we doing the best that we can for him as a person within the criminal justice system? Because this is what I try to dig in every week. Like, I know how people are. I know how people respond. Like, people sit behind a computer and they're like, oh, he killed somebody, let him fry, who cares? But I think we have to really look at, like, the criminal justice system is meant to work a certain way. And if it's not going to work the way it's supposed to, then what's the point in having one?
Well, I'm one of the people that my first thought, this is going to sound crazy to some people and out of the box, but he's mentally unstable. What if he hurts someone in prison that's trying to reform themselves?
Yeah. Well, I'll put this question to you. So obviously, we know I used to work in a prison. There are lots of people with mental health issues in prison. Sometimes they're only in prison because of their mental health issues, which I think is a pretty inappropriate way of handling it. However, if somebody is having a mental health episode, what do you think is done with them in prison?
They probably put them in a box by themselves.
Yep, they go to the hole.
Like, yeah, like that's which is insane.
What do you think then that does to their mental health?
They literally sit there and talk to themselves and think about their thoughts.
It worsens. So, I can think of a specific case where, this guy his mental health, he wouldn't take his meds, which is very common for people with mental health. They think they're better. They don't take their meds. Then, they would just continue to put him in the hole. And, their solution was to put him in the hole for longer periods of time to try to teach him a lesson, when in the long run, it just made him that much worse off. And, it would make me so sad. Like, I would try to talk to him about, like, let's not go to the hole today. We need you to be out with the rest of the inmates. You guys can play in the yard. You can, and you can do so many more things rather than just sitting in a box all day long. And, it just made his mental health worse. I mean, there's so much research about, like, you could take somebody who is sane and put them in the hole for an extended period of time, and their brain chemistry will start to change. So now we're taking somebody who already has mental health issues and locking them away, and it's just going to make it that much more worse.
I feel like I would go insane in a box with nothing to do. I would absolutely go insane. I know that for a fact.
Yeah, I mean, they've definitely done research about, how that can change people's brains. And I just, obviously I think we're going to re-explore this case down the road. I think we're going to probably have to do some mini episodes. Curtis is one that's probably going back to trial. We now have Joseph probably going back to trial. I don't know if I'm specifically picking ones that aren't resolved. I mean, that's probably why we're talking about it. But, I think that we have to really look at, I think sometimes as a community, as a whole, we have to pull back and say, yes, the family deserves justice. Yes, Tammy deserves justice. But are we doing what we need to do within the criminal justice system? We can't just say, this guy killed somebody, forget him, throw him in prison, and just do the criminal justice however we want based on the person. We either have to make it the same for everybody, or we might as well not have a criminal justice system at all.
Exactly, yeah.
So, yeah, I think this is definitely something we're going to have to look at and explore down the road. I think that, crime and past history, I'm okay with being talked about in the courtroom. I think it's absolutely relevant to the case, and the fact that they didn't talk about that makes it ridiculous.
I 100% agree with you.
They also aren't going to talk about his drug history. I mean, if he's potentially going into like psychotic or psychosis based on using, which is a possibility, I think that stuff needs to be talked about, and if they're not doing an insanity plea, then why does it matter? Why can't you talk about that stuff? The criminal justice system tries to make things complicated. It doesn't have to be complicated.
Yeah, sometimes it's cut and dry. I mean, you have evidence to say he did it. He's done it before. Figure out where he needs to go. Right. I think it's not even about if he did it or not. It's either he needs to be locked up or he needs to be in a mental health facility, correct?
Yes.
So, yeah, I mean...
So that's really the determination they need to make. And, I think if I was a victim or a family member of a victim, I think I would be fine with him being locked away in a psychiatric ward as well. I think people think like, well, no, he's going to get help and he's going to get better and he's going to get out. And that's not how that goes. I mean, he's potentially locked in there as well. It's just not that type of locked up. You know what I mean? It's still essentially a prison, so.
But they're going to try to reform and help him.
The main focus is his mental health.
Yeah.
A prison's main focus is the public safety, and so, a prison will say that mental health is important and there's mental health providers there, but I've definitely seen different. So, I think as a whole, mental health in society is not important as it should be, and that, obviously you and I know there's a huge stigma still around mental health. My current job is working with juveniles with mental health. So, I think that even then, like I have parents who are like, I don't want people knowing because they're going to look at my kid different. And, it's sad that it has to be like that. But when the mental health system and the criminal justice system combine, it just makes it that much more worse.
Yeah.
And, you have to really start to look at how can we still get justice for Tammy and still have the criminal justice system work the way that it's supposed to, because we can't just make exceptions based on people's emotions or feelings.
Yeah, you really can't pick or choose. I think that's the biggest thing about our system is, I mean, you really can't pick or choose. And having 50 states with different laws and different things about it, I think is a big thing. So, I mean, we could talk about this for hours and hours.
Of course.
But absolutely, this has been a very intense topic, and I thank you so much for bringing it to my attention because, I mean, it was an insane story to talk about.
I know mental health is important for you. It's important for me too. And, I think that it's important for people to really take a look at. I think sometimes we need to back up and realize, like, things aren't always what it seems.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. All right. So this has been a Gap in Justice. We're going to close it here. It has been a super intense episode, and I loved every second of it. So we will see you guys next week. Lindsay, you have anything else to say?
Nope, I hear the baby crying. I better get out there.
All right, cool. Peace out. We love you guys. Bye.